Hey everyone, on this episode of Dad Sews, I'm giving you my top 5 tips for the dreaded serger.
Dad Sews! Dad Sews! Dad Sews! Dad Sews! Dad Sews! Dad Sews! This is how it goes with Dad Sews!
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another episode of Dad Sews. I truly appreciate you stopping by. Now again, this is going to be 5 tips for your serger machine. My machine happens to be a Brother 1034D serger, but you might have a different model. All of these 5 tips will apply to you and your serger. Now, this very first tip is for someone who just took their serger out of the box. Don't do anything. Don't do a thing. Just freeze. Here's tip number 1. Okay, now when you get your brand new serger, it's probably going to have 4 different color threads already threaded in the machine. You'll notice I have all black because I've already used my machine. Well, what I want you to do is place it on your sewing table and then freeze. Grab your cell phone, open up the front door to your machine, and take a picture of how it's threaded. That way you'll have a visual reference of which color goes where. Then I want you to print off that picture and I want you to slide it under your machine. And that way you will always have a reference for how the machine is threaded. And also take a marker or a labeler if you have one and number your thread in the proper order. Now my machine has 4 slots, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the number order is 4, 3, 1, 2. I just took a Sharpie and I wrote on there 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the right order. Again, if you have a Brother 1034D, it's 4, 3, 1, 2. There you go. That's 2 tips in 1. Tip number 2. Okay, now I want you to keep those different color threads in your machine and I want you to put a piece of fabric in and just start sewing. As you're sewing along, I want you to slowly adjust the right tension dial and see what that does to that color piece of thread. Then put it back to about 4 to 5. Then I want you to adjust the second dial, or number 1, in the correct order. And then I want you to go to 3 and go to 4 and keep adjusting those dials and keep adjusting the settings on the side of your serger. And that way you can see what each one of them does to your thread and to your fabric. Then you can mark down on that picture that we took, okay, I used a piece of linen. These are the settings I need for a good seam. Okay, I used a piece of stretch fabric. These are the settings I need. That way you've written in all of your dialed in information, you've got your correct number order written on your machine, and you are going to be ready to tear up the world of sewing with your serger. Tip number 3. Okay, well, you have run out of all of that different color starter thread because you've been smart and you ran a piece of fabric through and played with your dials to see what the correct settings for your machine are. Now it's time to thread your machine. Now, as you can see, I have cone thread. This might be a little frightening to you for 2 reasons. 1, you're used to regular size spools of thread, and 2, you think, dang, that's going to be expensive, all that thread. Well, let me tell you, these 2 use a lot of thread. The one in your needle, maybe not so much, but you're going to want this cone of thread for 2 reasons. 1, cheap thread is a bad idea. Repeat that out loud. Cheap thread and a serger is a bad idea. Almost all of the problems I ran into when I was serging, and you can see some of those projects on Dad Sews and the failures, is because I was using cheap thread. And I was using spools of thread. And spools bounce around the machine. Yes, there's a little capper that you can put on top of the spool of thread after you run it through your serger, but it is not worth your trouble. Don't use cheap thread and don't use spools. Go ahead and buy cones. You can get them really cheap, or at least inexpensively. Everybody recommended to me getting Maxi-Lock thread. And you know what? Everyone was right. I've got a link in the information below where you can find Maxi-Lock thread for the absolute best price. It is really smart to get the right thread, the best thread for your machine. Now, if you're sewing a certain type of fabric, definitely look into what the right thread is for that project. But Maxi-Lock will not do you wrong. Tip number 4. Okay, well, you're used to using a regular sewing machine, so you're just gonna pin your project together and just run it under the needle on your serger. No! Stop! Don't do that. Why? Well, a serger is not a sewing machine. It has a blade that cuts the excess fabric on the other side of your seam. If you do pin your fabric, make sure that you pull them out well ahead of the blade. It can bend and break those needles and probably shoot them right into your eye. Please, please, please be careful when you're pinning fabric in your serger. What do I recommend? I recommend using Wonder Clips. Check the link below. You can get them very cheap online. Wonder Clips also don't want to run through the serger, but they're bigger and they're easier to grab, and you're not going to be getting your finger anywhere near that blade. So use Wonder Clips and keep things away from the blade on that serger. And if you're really scared, you can disengage the blade with the flip of a switch. Tip number 5. All right, well, we have come to our final, and I apologize, but most boring tip for your serger, and that is cleaning your machine. Now, why do you have to clean your machine? Well, it has a blade that cuts fabric, and that causes lint to fill up your machine, and it will get all around the thread that goes in the machine and all around the mechanisms. Now, some people have different opinions. Some people say you could use cans of air. Some people say that that causes it to fly too far into the machine around the oiled parts. Some people use vacuum. Some people, if you watch their YouTube videos, look like they have never cleaned their sergers. But I use a mini vacuum or computer vacuum. And all you do is open the door of your serger and lightly brush and suck away that lint. And I think that does a pretty good job. Yes, you need to oil your machine, but since every machine is different, I'm not going to tell you how to do that. You need to research that for your particular machine. You can find videos on YouTube, or you can open up that big fat manual that came with your machine. I know it's thick and daunting to go through, but you really need to get to know your machine. I didn't get to know my brother 1034D when I first used it because I sew things for the first time online in front of you guys. And honestly, if I fail, it's probably to both of our benefits. But you really need to get to know your machine. Treat her right and she'll treat you right. All right, well, thank you for joining me for these 5 tips for your serger. I hope you click a thumbs up below and share this with your friends. And please click the subscribe button. That way you know every time a new video comes out for Dad Sews. Don't forget our motto, #Sew, Fail, Repeat, and we will see you next time. Hey, before you go, don't forget we are giving away this epic retro book, The Best of Sewing with Nancy. You remember Sewing with Nancy from PBS, right? This thing has some great information, great tutorials, and great patterns. And let me tell you, it has got some wacky pictures in it. Sometimes these old books are the best. So all you have to do is tag Dad Sews at Dad Sews on Twitter or Facebook and tag a friend. That way you're sharing Dad Sews with them, and maybe we'll be sharing this book with you. Don't forget to visit dadsews.com for more tutorials, funny videos, lists, and epic fails.
This production is brought to you by the Plaid Dad Blog Podcast Network. For more information, visit us at plaiddadblog.com.